Hi guys, this is Rachel from StudioUs again with another at-home drawing lesson for you all. Today we're going to be working with oil pastels, making this very detailed cactus drawing. So go ahead and grab your supplies and we'll get started. So to start off, we're going to take our blank piece of paper as well as our drawing pencil, a Sharpie marker, and a large eraser to clear off all of our lines. And now we'll get started with the drawing. To kick things off, we're going to find the midpoint, both horizontally and vertically, and we're going to center that first bit of cactus right in the vertical center of our paper. So I'm marking out the top, bottom, and sides. And as I dot this out, I'm looking for any waves in the shape. Kind of keep track of how many bumps there are and then shape it out as necessary. I can fine tune the shape as I go to make sure I'm staying right on track. Clear off any dots that I don't want, and then I'll just draw it in. From here, we're going to be adding our first little cactus blossoms. One to the right down near the bottom, two at the top center, and then one about 2/3 of the way up on the left. Paying close attention to where there are dips in the shape and the relative size of these little blossoms to the piece of cactus that I already drew. So I give myself a little guide dot to get the shape and then draw it in. Alright, we've got all 4 of those in. On to the next step. So I'm going to use these little blossoms to help me figure out where the next shapes go. So based on where they touch the blossoms or where they come out of the cactus, I can use that as a guide to get me started and then fit my shape in as I see it interacting with the shapes we already have on the page. I'm still looking for those wave patterns as I build this out. Same thing on the other side, looking at where it starts, how far out it is from the cactus, and giving myself a dotted guideline and drawing it in. Coming off that last piece, we've got 2 large chunks of cactus here. One's coming out almost all the way to the side. Still looking for that wavy pattern down at the bottom, keeping it just under halfway up the page. Once we've got it dotted out where we like, we'll sketch in the shape. The next one nestles in right between that cactus blossom and the last piece of cactus that we drew. What I'm doing is checking the angle between the first piece and the second piece to see about how high up it comes. You can do that by kind of imagining a straight line going from the top of that first piece of cactus we drew to the top of the next one. You can measure that on the reference and carry it over to the picture. we've got that dotted out, and now we'll sketch it in. Alright, two more, one coming up in the center and then one to the right of the page. I'm looking at where they touch other things that I've already drawn to help give me a guide for about how tall or long these lines should be. This one's leaning out to the right. Goes almost out to the right edge of the page. You get that little bump coming in. Once we've got it dotted out, just sketch it in. Alright, we've got more cactus blossoms to add, coming off of those pieces we added in the last two steps. And a little extra piece of cactus kind of nestled between those two pieces on the left. That's just a pretty simple curve with a little bump action in it. And then we're going to keep these little blossoms about the same size as the first set we drew. So still marking out where I see the start, end, top, and bottom of all of these pieces, or anywhere I see it intersecting a line. Just sketching these out. Alright, adding some more cactuses, building up toward the top. This piece in the center comes almost all the way up to the top. I'm keeping a close eye on where it intersects with the other pieces. Same with the piece in the center right. I'm going to mark where it starts, where it stops, and about how far out it goes, and then sketch in those waves. The more pieces you start to draw in, the more the new things we add start to kind of fit into place, almost like a puzzle. So it gives you more reference points to kind of eyeball the different relationships between the shapes that we're adding in. Get these last two on the far right side going off the page. We're on to our next step. A few more big pieces coming up out at the top right. At this point, it's helpful to compare relative height. I noticed that the piece in the center that goes almost all the way to the top is a little bit taller than that piece we just drew. And this one is even shorter than the last piece we drew. So it's helping me find my top and my side guidelines. adding a few more cactus blossoms on one of those cactus pieces up near the top, making sure these don't stray off the page. They should still be about the same size relative to the rest of the blossoms that we've drawn so far. Alright, so we're on to our erasing step. And we're going to clear out any lines going through the bottom of our cactus blossoms. We're also going to look for anywhere where a cactus piece might overlap with another cactus piece and clear out the line for the piece that's in the foreground. This is going to help us build some depth with our cactus. We'll have some pieces in front, some pieces behind, to add a little extra interest to the picture. Looking carefully for any little pieces. There's a ton of tiny overlaps in this picture, so make sure you're checking as you go. Don't forget to touch up any lines that might have gotten erased. And before we move on, we can start adding those little circles inside our cactus blossoms to give them a little more dimension. Alright, on to our next step. We're finishing out those long little ovals at the tops of our cactus blossoms. The last few pieces. And finally, we're going to add a little bit of texture to the cactus. So these are little C shapes. Some of them are turned sideways or upside down, or backwards. You can try to track them and make them look exactly like you see them on the reference image, or just kind of sparsely add these little shapes, changing direction as you go. And this is going to kind of mimic the bumps and spikes you would see on this kind of cactus. just about done with all of our cactus texture. It's looking good so far. We're going to grab our Sharpie marker and very carefully trace over all of the lines on our cactus, making sure to watch out for where we've overlapped things. And really take your time with these Sharpie lines. Once you've put that much effort into drawing a picture, you want to take a lot of time inking it to make sure it stays as accurate as possible. Look at our last few lines, erase the pencil lines out from underneath the Sharpie, and then get into coloring. So to start, we're going to use our tan oil pastel, and we're going to carefully outline anywhere that the tan background touches the cactus or the edge of our paper. As you're building this up, make sure you're wiggling that oil pastel a lot. The friction from wiggling it back and forth will melt the pastel a little bit and help you create a more smooth texture that goes on evenly. Whereas if you're just working from sort of a pastel in its solid state, it goes on a lot more chalky and you tend to get a lot of white spots. So the more you wiggle over the same area and build it up, that oil pastel will melt down a little bit and start getting you that nice smooth layer that you're looking for. Keep working through each section to fill in all of the tan areas, paying special care to look for little empty tan spaces between the cactus pieces. Alright, we'll finish up those last little bits of tan up at the top. Still taking care to keep everything smooth. we've got our background finished. From here we're going to move on to a dark turquoise color to get those 3 turquoise pieces kind of running up the center left of the page. There's a lot of color depth in these pieces, so we're going to start with a main color and then layer up additional colors over it to build shadow and highlight. So just like with the background, I'm taking my time to outline the outer edge of the shape and then fill it in to get that smooth texture. All right, we've got our turquoise in. So we're going to take a dark blue and start building up the shadows to create that blue shadow on the side of these pieces. You can lay that blue anywhere on these we see it getting a little bit darker. We'll take our light seafoam green and use this as sort of a center tone, working between those black C shapes that we added for texture to build a little bit of highlight on that turquoise and just alter the color a little bit. So we have some dark spots around those black curves and some light spots filling in the lighter space around them. You can also build up those edge highlights with that light seafoam green to start setting up the lighter tones wherever you see them around the edge of the cactus shapes. We'll do the same for the other turquoise pieces, carefully building up around those curved C shapes and getting the edge highlight. I'm going to go back in with a dark blue, and within those C shapes, kind of going around the outer curve of them, we're going to build up some darker shadows around that texture. After that, we can take a white and just press down to create the dots to build up that edge. Same on the other pieces, we'll go on with the blue and then just press down on a corner to build up those white highlights. You can also add a little extra white to the edges to brighten them up even more. And we've got our turquoise pieces about done. I'm going to go in and fill in that inner area with turquoise, getting it really dark. And then we'll repeat the process, adding the shadow with the bright blue around the edges and in those texture bits, and then little white dots to add highlight. Next, we're going to take a regular old green and fill in this nice medium green piece over here. Following that, we're going to go in with our lighter yellowy green and fill in all of the light yellowy green areas in the cactus. So for some of the pieces where it's divided, we can mark out where we see the yellowy green and where we see a darker area and fill in with that lighter color first. We'll finish up that last bit of green. And from here, we're going to go back in with our regular green, fill in any of those darker green areas on the pieces that are split in color. And then just like we did with the other piece, we'll fill in any empty areas, looking for any of those darker green spots that we haven't colored in with the light green yet. After that, we can start adding in any darker shadows. And like we did with the seafoam green on those turquoise pieces, we're going to use this green color to build up a tone between those dark C shapes. So I'm wiggling it in what would be kind of the flat spaces on this cactus to create the illusion that there's a flat area and then a raised area that's got more of a tone to it. And we can add this into all of our yellowy green cactus pieces. Some are a little more dark, some are a little brighter. So you can vary how much you're adding on depending on the lighting you want on each piece. Alright, going in with the yellow, we're going to start building up some of our highlights on the edges of those light green pieces. So here I'm pushing pretty hard to kind of break into that lime green a little bit and get the yellow to mix in and create just the slightest hint of highlight. Go ahead and put that anywhere you see it. Following that, we're going in with the seafoam green and playing up some of these highlights even more to add a little bit more white to some of these tones. We can build it up on top of those black C shapes as well to create the illusion that they're raised a little bit, giving them more of a highlight on each piece. On that top piece, I'm going to create a broken line in the highlight to create little highlights hitting each wave, get the C shapes as well. And just laying this in anywhere I see a little bit more of a white tone. It's not quite pure white like the little spikes on our turquoise pieces. From here we'll go in with our pure white, press down on the corner. I'm not even wiggling it, I'm just pushing down pretty firmly to get a little white spot in each of those little pokes. I'm going to go in with our darkest green now, and on the green areas where we filled the cactus body in green instead of yellow-green, we'll use this as the fill color for those flat spots. So just like we use the regular green on the light green spots, we'll kind of wiggle this in between those C shapes to create a little more depth of color. You can also use this to outline any darker shadows we see going around the edges of our shapes. Got a dark shadow right on the edge of that highlight up on the top, creating a little bit more shadow blending down into those greens, going around the bottom edge as well. Now look closely for any dark shadows going around the edges. It's a great way to redefine your lines if you've been losing your black lines a little bit. Alright, looking good for the dark green. We're going to take a golden brown, get some of the highlights on the green piece. You can also get a couple more golden brown highlights on that piece up top. Give it a little bit more texture, wherever you see just a hint of brown on the greens. Finally, going in with our white to get our dots on the darker green pieces. Alright, we're going to take a medium blue color and get the last three pieces of our cactus. So just like the last ones, outline them carefully, then fill them in smoothly. Alright, we've got the last bits of our medium blue filled in. We'll go in with the darkest blue in our oil pastel pack and start building up some of the darker shadows we see within those blues. So So looking for any outlines and filling in those flat empty spaces between our little seed texture shapes. Getting to our last piece. Looking good with the shadows so far. Build up any darker blues on those turquoise bits as well, since we've got it out, just to bring them a little darker. After that, we're going to take our white and bring out any of the lighter highlights on those blues. The blue colors are already pretty dark, so using a white is going to blend them together and just create a lighter, brighter blue than if we went in with a light blue pastel. So we'll get those little highlights around our C shapes to create that bump texture. And get any highlights on the edge as well. If you get a little too much blue built up on your white, you can always grab a tissue and just wipe it off. And from there, we'll just press down and build up our white bumpy dots. This is a good point to check and make sure you've got a nice little white dot on every one of those C shapes that we put in there. Going in with the black and very, very lightly going to apply this to create some of those darkest shadows on the blue. I don't want to push super hard and make it completely pitch black. I just want to wiggle it lightly into the blue to help it blend in and create a darker blue by mixing those colors together. Alright, building up any last little highlights on those edges of the blues just to get a little more color diversity. And that'll about do it for our cactuses. So let's go in and get these little berries we got going here. We're going to take a red and, taking your time to outline, fill in each one nice and smooth, getting it completely filled in with red. That last little one up top. From here, we're going to go in with a reddish purple and start setting up some of our shadows. So I'm just blending lightly into the red to build up a little more color value and create kind of a mid-tone shadow. last couple pieces shaded in. Once we've got those mid-tones in, we can go in with the darkest purple in our pack and just on the edges start building in that darkest color. So you should have a bit of a gradient going between the red, the reddish purple, and then our darkest purple shadows. These are also going to fill in those little scoopy ovals at the tops of each of our little cactus flowers. Once we've got those in, we can grab our white. Make sure you've cleaned off any blue left on it. And then we're going to go in, kind of dig in with that white and get all of our highlights. So you get a little highlight on the edge of each berry, and then a scoop around the outer edge of that little oval we've got setting in at the top. Finish those last few up, and that will do it for this cactus. Hope you guys had a great time, and we'll see you for the next one.